Hello, uh, my name is Peter Twining. I'm really excited to be here with you and slightly intimidated by all the different countries that you're all being in. So I shall get going. Uh, I'm hoping if not, you can all see my slides. Okay, so I'm Professor of Innovation in Schooling and Educational Technology at the University of Newcastle in Australia. I'd like to start by giving my thanks to Dr. Minia Musa for organising this session. He poked me on several occasions to say, hey, Peter, will you do something for us? And I said yes, but was a bit slow in actually getting my act together. So thank you ever so much, Minia, for making this all happen. I do want to just make one little proviso. It did say in the blurb that I was learning from best practice, and I would hate anyone to think that I was claiming that what we're doing is best practice. Partly because I don't think there's such a thing as best practice, because what works well in one place may not work well in another. So I hope it's interesting practice, and I hope that you find the whole talk interesting, and I'm happy to answer questions as they crop up. Okay, so let's get going. What I'm going to do today is I'm going to talk to you about how we've tried to enhance some of the courses in our initial teacher education program. Before that, I do that, and as is customary in Australia, I'd like to just acknowledge the traditional custodians of the various lands on which we work today and pay respects to the elders past, present and emerging, and extend that respect to other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Island people joining us today. I haven't seen any other Australian people joining the session, but you never know. In case you're interested, that's the view from my living room. I'm very fortunate to live right close to the sea and have these wonderful sunsets. So let's get going. In 2020, we decided that we were going to, well, we had two courses. We had Educ 1038, which is the secondary BEd foundation course. So this is the core course that all secondary BEd students have to do next year of the 4-year program. And it has a sister course, Educ 1048, which is the foundation course, the core foundation course for all first-year students in our 4-year primary and our primary and early years BEd programs. Both courses and had different staff in each campus. Both courses had different sets of lectures. So there were 2 sets of lectures for Educ 1038, and there were 2 different sets of lectures for Educ 1048. The material within each course was fairly similar, but not the same, and the lectures were designed and delivered by different people. So we got 4 sets of lectures. We had Blackboard sites, 4 Blackboard sites, so 1 Blackboard site for each course on each of the campuses. So there were 4 separate Blackboard sites with different materials in them. And the Blackboard sites were arranged in the way that they very often are here at the University of Newcastle, in a series of folders. So you had a folder for each week, and within the folders, you had sets of resources. So you might have a video of the lecture, you might have slides from the tutorial, and you'd have some other things. You might have a journal article or a book chapter. You might have some videos that you were expected to watch. But effectively, they're just in a repository. So they've been put in the folder, but there's no structure to them. There's no information about what you're supposed to do with them or why you're supposed to be reading or watching them. So not a very kind of structured and supportive environment. So we've got the 4 separate Blackboard sites, and then we had 4 different sets of tutorials. So each week on each course, there would be 2-hour tutorials at each campus with about 30 students in each tutorial. And again, each of the tutorials is slightly different across the different campuses and for the different courses. So 4 sets of tutorials. And we had different assignments. So Educ 1038 had 3 assignments. The first one involved students finding 2 sources, 2 journal articles, and writing a Cornell note, which is a particular way of taking notes about something. And they have to read the Cornell notes, and then they have to write a fairly short synthesis of how the 2 articles relate to the topic that they've chosen to write about. And part of the reason we use the Cornell notes is because they're first-year students, and we're trying not only to help them to understand about education and becoming a teacher, but we're also helping them develop the academic literacy that they can use across the rest of their BA program. So using Cornell Notes as a way of note-taking is a useful academic skill for them to have. The second assignment on Edu 1038 was an annotated bibliography. So they have to choose a topic, a topical issue within education, and then they have to find 6 sources that address that issue. And we specified that 2 of the sources have to be journal articles, 1 has to be a news item, 1 has to be a video, 1 has to be a still image, and so forth. So they've got some constraints, but basically they've got to try and find 6 sources that relate to their topical issue. They have to write a bibliography entry, so effectively a summary of what that source says about the topic for each of the 6 items. And then they have to write an 800-word argument about what their position is in relation to the issue that they've chosen, okay, drawing upon the 6 sources that they've written the annotated bibliography entries for. And then finally, there was an unseen exam at the end of Edu 1038. Okay, so that's what the secondary students had. The primary and early year students, the first assignment for them is an analysis of a journal article. So they have to read the journal article, they have to summarize what the main arguments are in the journal article, and they have to critique it. And then they also do an annotated bibliography, very similar to the one that is done by the secondary students. And then they have to write a reflection about their views about becoming a teacher and what they think an effective teacher does. And they also have to do a plan of how they are going to ensure that they meet the teaching standards that they have to meet in order to graduate and qualify as a teacher. So there's 5 different assignments across the 2 courses. But interestingly, both courses have exactly the same learning outcomes. So in 2021, we decided that we were going to align the two courses, and in effect there were actually 4 courses because each one ran on 2 campuses and had separate sets of materials and separate staff. So we decided we're going to align them, and effectively we're going to try and turn them into 1 course. There are 2 course coordinators, so that's myself and a colleague called Heather Sharp. She was responsible for the secondary course. I was responsible for the primary and early years course. And we agreed that we were going to pull them together and make them effectively into 1 course. Across the 2 courses, there are over 1,100 first-year students. So it's a large cohort of students. About 400 of those are secondary students, and the rest are primary and early years students. And on each run of the course, there are 16 tutors and roughly 38 tutor groups. So one of the big challenges for us is not only do we want to enhance the quality of the student experience, but we want to ensure that they're getting a consistent experience across the 38 different tutor groups with all of the different tutors. And it was really important for us that their experience is comparable and that they're getting consistent messages. And very often we were finding that students were getting, for example, different information about what was required or expected for the different assignments. So different tutors would have different discussions about what the students had to do well on the assignments. We also wanted to model the sort of practice that we were encouraging the students to adopt. We wanted to kind of walk the talk. So we didn't want to just tell them what we thought they should be doing in terms of their own practice when they became teachers, but we wanted to be demonstrating the use of those sorts of approaches ourselves. And we wanted to be as supportive as possible. So we didn't want to reduce the kind of quality and the rigor that was required. But a lot of our students are first in family at university. And we really wanted to make sure that we give them the maximum support we can to ensure that they can reach those high standards that we expect. And because of the large numbers of students, there were some issues with technology that we also had to address. So these are some of the challenges that we're trying to deal with. So the first thing is we decided we're going to go from having 2 individual course coordinators, and within the university, the course coordinator is the person who designs the course and has overall responsibility for making sure that the course is transacted in the most effective way and the students have the best experience they can. And we decided we were going to work as a collaborative team. So rather than each of us designing our own materials, we were going to play off each other. we were going to critique each other's materials, and we were going to design the materials together to make sure that they really were as high quality as we could make them. And we also decided we'd have one shared email address so that when students had a problem, whether they were a secondary student or an early childhood student or a primary student, rather than having to email one person, they could email the shared email address and either of us could respond. And that meant that they would get a quicker response because Heather tends to work late in the night and I tend to work early in the morning. When one of us is not around, the other one can deal with the emails. So our starting point after that was to say, well, what are we going to do about the assessment? Because we think that, you know, whatever you're doing should be driven towards the assessment. We know that's what students focus on, and quite rightly so. If that's what we're using as a metric to say whether they've achieved what they need to or not, then we need to be measuring the right things. So we decided that we'd get rid of the essay, the first essay, but we'd keep the Cornell notes, so that we're going to have Cornell notes as our first assignment. So again, they're going to be given some readings, 2 readings. They have to summarize those readings in their own words within the Cornell note. And then they have to write a little synthesis of what this tells them about the issue they're addressing. Obviously, we kept the annotated bibliography because that was already there on both courses. We had to change the focus a bit so that we were clearer that we were directing them to the same sorts of sources. But basically, the format stayed the same. And then we decided to get rid of both the exam and the final reflection. And we replaced it with a 5-minute video in which the students have to talk about what they've learned from the course. So what they think the key messages from the course were. And then that has to be supported with a 1,000-word academic exposition, which really provides the theoretical underpinnings for the things that they said in the video. So they're having to draw on the literature, provide references, and provide an argument that supports all the claims and all the things that they've talked about in their 5-minute video. So we end up with 3 assignments, one of which was radically different. And again, I think it's fairly clear here, not only are we wanting them to address the kind of content around becoming a teacher, which is the focus of this course, but also we're wanting to develop their academic literacy skills, their ability to take notes, their ability to search for literature, their ability to synthesize and to critique. We then decided we really needed to look at the rubrics. The rubrics that we were using suffered many of the problems that are common in rubrics. So the first was we have these sort of fuzzy terms, like what's the difference between appropriate use and good understanding and exceptional understanding? It's not clear to me, certainly isn't clear to our students. And so it's very unhelpful. And a rubric really ought to be providing a scaffold that helps the students to understand what success will look like. What do I have to do really well on this criterion? So we wanted to change the way we worded the criteria. So we got rid of that fuzzy language and we put in much more specific and supportive descriptors of what the different grade bands would look like. The other issue with this is not only does it have stuff about grammar and spelling and so forth, but it's also got stuff about APA referencing. And you could do really well on APA referencing and really badly on your use of grammar, for example. And it's then unclear about where you should fit the assignment because it's doing well on one thing and badly on the other. So we wanted to split out our criteria so that they were orthogonal, so that each criteria had one clear focus. And you couldn't end up that you could be part of your assignment fit in one part of the criteria and part of it's fit in a different part of the same criterion. You need to be really clear where you were going to fit. So we redesigned the rubrics and for example, in terms of the clarity of English, we tried to frame it in a way that made it really, really explicit about what we thought clarity of communication looked like. So, for example, long sentences. For us, a long sentence is a sentence that spans more than 4 lines. It's very clear, it's very explicit, and what we're trying to do is help the students write nice, clear, simple, straightforward English. We hope they understand what grammatically correct and correct spelling is, though there are issues about Australian spelling, English spelling, American spelling, but that's relatively unproblematic. This bottom one, incorrect terminology. There's a real issue within schools, both in Australia and the UK. I used to where in secondary school, they get encouraged to write this flowery language. They get encouraged to use adverbial phrases and to get the thesaurus out and look up alternative words that they could use to describe things and subjectives and they need to do that to do well in their English exams. But actually, it sometimes makes it really hard to understand what they're trying to say. So we're wanting them to use the correct terminology, but we're wanting them to write it in as straightforward a way as we can. And we decided that we really wanted to make sure that all of the students engaged with the rubric, and past experience told us that some of the students, and particularly the weaker students, tended not to look at the rubric very much. So we're going to get them marks actually self-assessing their assignment. So we're going to get them to assess their assignment against the rubric. And they had to highlight how they thought their assignment had done against each of the criteria within the rubric. We didn't give a mark well they'd assessed it. So it wasn't you get a high mark if your assessment is similar to your markers. They just got a mark for doing the assessment. So they could, it was really just to encourage them to look at the rubric, and it worked really effectively. So one of the things that came really frustrating is students might highlight to say that they had long sentences or that there were spelling errors, but they didn't then go back and correct those things. They didn't put them right. So that was a little bit frustrating. But it was that the majority of students were actually looking at the rubric more than they had done in the past. Okay, so we've redesigned the assignments. We know what we're trying to achieve. We then thought, let's go in and redesign all of the materials. So we started with the lectures, which traditionally had delivered an awful lot of the kind of content and material students were supposed to learn. Well, we decided we'd get rid of the lectures and replace them, first of all, with a 1-hour question and answer session, which would be optional. The lectures are not optional, they were compulsory. Now, the session was really designed to help us deal with this issue of consistency. We wanted all the students to get the same message about the assignments. And so we said, what we're going to do is, assignments, we will deal with them in the Q&A session. So that meant that Heather and I, as the two course coordinators, would talk all of the students through each of the assignments, explaining what the assignment required, explaining what the rubric meant and what they had to do well or to move up from one grade boundary to another. And that was going to happen in the Q&A sessions rather than in the tutorials, so that they're getting one consistent set of messages from Heather and I, rather from the 18 teachers. In order to deal with the 1,000 students, and also because there were COVID restrictions, we ran the Q&A sessions as Zoom webinars. But with over 1,000 students, Zoom webinars couldn't cope. At least we didn't have a license that would cope with 1,000 students synchronously. So we live streamed over YouTube. And because we wanted to be a question and answer session, we had to make it interactive. And of course, the people in YouTube, it was difficult for them to ask questions and have them answered. So we used an easy retro board, which allows students to post up questions. So here's an example of the easy retro board, actually from the first week. And there are different columns, so they can put in different sorts of comments. They can vote up or vote down other people's comments. So if someone's got the same problem as you, they'll vote it up, and they can add comments to the things people have posted in. We got a lot of input through the easy retro board. 217 questions in the first Q&A session that we ran, and we would answer some of them. Effectively, what happened is Heather was running the synchronous Q&A session, talking to students and answering students verbally, and I was dealing with the easy retro board and answering students by typing comments and responses in the easy retro board. So very interactive, and gave all the students a chance to contribute. And then we kind of complemented all of that by having forum discussions. So within the course Blackboard site, there were help discussions where students could ask questions. So if they weren't able to come to the Q&A session, or they had questions that came up at other times, they could ask in the discussion forum. And of course, they also had the positional email account that they could send messages to. Though we really wanted to encourage them to use the Q&A or the discussion forums, because sometimes that meant that other students knew the answers, and so it was quicker. They got a quicker response than waiting for us to answer. But it also encouraged them to look and see, has someone else asked this question already? In which case you could just find the answer. You don't need to ask the question again. And that made things quicker for students, and obviously it saved us time too. And then we had weekly emails in which we summarized any issues that come up previous week and highlighted things that were coming in the future that students needed to be aware of, particularly around the assignments. So we've partially got rid of the lectures, but of course we've got all that material that the lectures were used to deliver in the past, and the students still needed to engage with that material. So what we did is we developed a structured sequence of activities within the Blackboard site. As with the previous Blackboard sites, we had folders which were organized by week. But what was different was that we tried to provide a very structured progression through the materials. So there was a sequence of activities. They were numbered so we could refer to them very easily, but these took students on a journey that progressively took them through the material. And they had timings so that they knew how long it was going to take to do each activity. We explained why they were doing the activity, and we explained exactly what they have to do. So it wasn't just watch a video, it was, as you watch this video, think about this and write notes on that. So it was very structured in terms of supporting students on a journey as they work through the materials. So we got this kind of much more scaffolded set of weekly activities. The other thing we did was we separated some activities which we call tutorial prep. Now the point here is that when students come to the tutorial, for the tutorial to work effectively, they have to have done some of the preparation. If we're going to discuss a journal article in the tutorial, they need to have read the journal article before they come to the tutorial. So we separated out those activities that had to be done before the tutorial so that students knew, I've got to do these ones. If I'm busy and I haven't got time to do all of the activities for this week, then I'm going to focus in on the tutorial prep ones before the tutorial, and I can catch up with the other ones afterwards. This was really important in terms of making sure that the tutorials were going to be as effective as possible. And that reflects the fact that we changed the tutorials from effectively being mini lectures, which is what they had been in the past, not that engaging, the academics talking at the students most of the time. And we turned them into much more interactive, facilitated group discussion and group interaction. So that the role of the tutors changed from being the sage on the stage to the guide on the side, if you will. But it really meant that it was critical that the students were ready and prepared for those discussions to really work effectively. And because we wanted to walk the talk, because we wanted to model the sort of practice that we wanted students to engage with, we then asked them at the end of every tutorial to reflect on how the tutorial had gone. What had they benefited from in the tutorial? What had they learned? What had they found interesting? What had they found not interesting? What had they found helpful? What could we have done better? And what we're trying to do here is we're trying to model the notion of teachers should be reflective practitioners. Now, stuff is going to go wrong in your tutorials, and you need feedback. You need to know what's gone wrong, what's worked well for your students, what hasn't. And it's also about modeling that it's okay to make mistakes. In fact, it's important to make mistakes. You learn from your mistakes. So this was deliberately about trying to get the students to recognize that it's okay not to get it right, as long as you learn from it and you move forward. You might be wondering, why did we bring in Padlet at this stage? Why didn't we carry on using Easy Retro, which we could have done? We had the drills over 13 weeks. That's a lot of different feedback sessions. Padlet's very cheap. Easy Retro is very expensive. So this was a purely financial decision. We could afford Padlet. We couldn't afford to pay for Easy Retro. We were using the free version of Easy Retro. So pragmatics kind of interfered. So that was the redesign of the materials. and the whole way in which we're kind of helping students engage with the content. But what's the impact? Well, it's really hard to say what impact has been. We've had lots and lots of really positive feedback from lots of different people. Our learning advisors support the students in the library and in the learning centre outside of the kind of formal course provision. And the messages we get, this course is very different to everything students have experienced on the other courses they do. They find it more engaging, they find it more supportive. But you know, there are lots of factors. There's personalities, there's the quality of your tutors, there's all sorts of different cohorts of students. So you know, take this with a pinch of salt. Our perception was that the students were getting a better experience. But of course, we don't want to stop there. So we're thinking about what we're going to do in 2022 as we move forward. And the thing that we're really grappling with at the moment relates to the whole issue about marks and grades. And we're wanting to move from using marks and grades to using micro-credentials. And if we look at what happens at the moment with our students, they have to demonstrate that they've met the Australian professional standards for teachers at the graduate teacher level. And what happens is that our courses are mapped against those standards and students get a grade for the course. So they might get 60%, which is a reasonable pass. And the assumption is if they've passed the course, then they've met the standards that that course was mapped against. But of course, in reality, you might have done really well on part of the course, but you've got 60%, so there's 40% of the course that you really haven't done that well on. And we don't have any idea which bit of the course you've done well on and which bit you haven't done well on. So the 60% isn't very informative. So we're hoping that by giving them digital badges that are aligned with the different standards, that will give them a much clearer understanding about what they've done well, they haven't well, and where the gaps are in their provision, so that they know what they need to do next. We also know that when you get 60% as a result on an assignment, all the literature says, you know, the majority of students don't then go on and look at the other feedback that's been provided. So they've lost that formative assessment opportunity to learn about, you know, what they could have done better, how they could have improved the result. What we're hoping will happen is that when they get the badges without the mark, they'll have to look at the badges, they'll get some formative feedback, because the badges will tell them which things they've done well against. The other thing about the badge, of course, is there's no negativity here. It's not like you've got 60%, you've not 40%. It's like you've badges, it's all positive. And we know that kind of positive, well, actually the negativity undermines students' learning. But of course, there's lots and lots of problems with badges, so we're not quite sure how this is going to go. Our university systems are entirely working with this sort of marks and grades and grade descriptions. And indeed, at the end of each course, we have to submit a number, just a single number, to say how each student has done. So each student gets a number that tells us how they've done. It's the mark. How will they know if they've passed the course or not? So that will be an interesting one for us. We rely on grade point averages here for students who don't or higher degree. They have to have a certain grade point average. If there are no marks, there are no grade point averages. So how do you sort that out? The university system is designed to deal with numbers. Not sure how it's going to handle badges, so that's going to be interesting. It's going to create a lot of extra work. One of the things we found is that looking at our rubrics and then turning them into badging rubrics that are mapped onto the teaching standards, we realized that actually our isn't as focused on the teaching standards as it really needs to be. So we're having to not just redesign the rubrics to give the badges and to be more explicit about what success looks like, but it's making us be much more focused on what are the teaching standards, what are the things our students actually have to be taught and assessed against in order to meet those teaching standards. And of course, at the end of the day, is it going to enhance student engagement? Will students like it or will they hate it? Will they be saying, where's my mark? I want the mark. We don't know. So that will be a challenge. And then you've got all the issues about the kind of validity and reliability of digital badges, particularly in a context in which badges are often awarded for people just having finished a course, not for having demonstrated they've achieved something, but just for seat time, in effect. And fundamentally, there's a lack of academic research on micro-credentials. There's lots of logic that assumes why they might be beneficial, but we really don't know if that's true or not. So we're really wanting to explore and unpack that. I think I'm kind of going to stop at this point. I have set up a Padlet, so you can give me some feedback or ask questions through Padlet by scanning that QR code, going into Padlet, and you can enter comments or feedback. And I'm very happy to answer any questions if you want to post them in the comments. So I shall shut up for a minute and just see if anyone wants to come back to me and say, what was that all about? One of the things I say to my students when they're giving our feedback at the end of tutorials, that they love giving us, as you guys are doing, which is great, lots and lots of positive feedback. What I really crave is that constructive criticism. I really want to know, what could I have done better? What wasn't clear? What could have been clearer? What have I missed? What have I not thought about? Because that will help me do this better next time. So that's the kind of message I'm trying to give my students, and I guess it's the kind of message I'd like from you. Is now, ask me some difficult questions, challenge me a bit. Constructive criticism is the best form of praise in some ways. Oops, I'm not supposed to put that on that one. I'm going into the Padlet to see if anyone's posting any messages. Not a sausage. Come on, people, you can post something in Padlet. Someone asked if they could access the materials. I'm afraid I can't give you access to the course materials because they're hidden behind the university's firewall. I'm happy. I have actually on my blog site. Okay, how do we upgrade their critical thinking skills? What we do are things like when they're giving me feedback, I ask them about how they can give me constructive critical feedback. So it's not just I liked it, it's what did you like, but also what could I have done better? So it's encouraging to think about that. We also get journal articles and we get them to go through and read the journal articles and summarize what they think the article is about, pulling out the key arguments that are being made, trying to critique the arguments, trying to understand. You can't scan the Padlet. Oh no! The QR, there is a URL at the bottom if you can't see if the QR code isn't working. The blog link, yes, okay, my blog link. Hang on, I'll share my blog link. Halfbaked.education, which I thought was an appropriate name for a blog from someone who's kind of thinking aloud. What action possibly done if someone doesn't pass the course? Okay, so if you don't pass with this particular course, if you don't pass the course, you've got to take it again, or you can't progress to the next year of the program. So you might change to a different program or take the course again. Students, if they for some reason are not able to attend the tutorials, so the tutorials do have compulsory attendance requirement. That's not set by the university, that's set by the external accrediting agency who oversees teacher education in Australia. If they can't attend all of the tutorials for valid reasons, then they can do what we call make-up activities. So we give them alternative work to do to demonstrate that they have engaged with the material that they would have had to engage with within the tutorial. How your teachers use tutorials in live classes. I think the important thing for us is we're trying to make the tutorials as kind of student focused as possible. This course is very much about getting the students to unpack their values and beliefs and what they think effective practice looks like, and to demonstrate and broaden their horizons about the wide range of possible approaches to supporting learning that are out there. Our students tend to come in with a very traditional view of what teaching looks like, of the teacher stood at the front delivering a fairly traditional lesson, and then the students doing some activity, often filling in a worksheet that allows them to practice the thing they've just been taught about. And we're trying to show them that's one way to teach students, but there's a lot of other ways to teach students, that you need to be able to have that full repertoire so you can choose the appropriate way to use with different students when you're trying to teach different things. And so for us, it's about making sure that the tutors are supporting the students. So we provide notes for the tutors with all the activities laid out that we want the students to do, and explaining to the tutors how long we think an activity should take, what we think they should be doing, what they should be looking for, the sorts of issues that are likely to come up. But they are professional teachers, so they also use their professional judgment to try and ensure that the tutorials run as smoothly as possible. But it is very much for us about trying to ensure that it's a safe space for students, that they feel safe to express their confusions, uncertainties, disagreements in a kind of professional, mature manner, and really just encouraging them to engage. Is critical thinking the same as problem solving? Gosh, now you're asking me difficult questions. I think problem solving probably involves a certain amount of critical thinking, but I don't think they're the same thing. I can solve a problem without necessarily being critical. You could ask me, is problem solving the same as being creative? And I might say it was. There's clearly overlaps, but I don't think they're the same. I'm just looking at the blog post. Is it hard to work that way? No, it's more fun, actually. And one of the things I'm going to do, I'm actually running a version of the course for students who failed it in semester one. I'm running it in January this year. And I'm actually going to get the students to run the tutorials. So I'm going to get them to act as if they were the tutors. So they're going to get the notes about how to run the tutorial, and they are going to run the tutorial, and the tutor is going to be there to support them in running the tutorial and to give them critical feedback and that sort of stuff. We did that to a tiny extent last year, just in one or two of the tutorial groups, and just in one or two of the actual tutorials. And those students who had that experience of running the tutorial found it incredibly rewarding, and really very positive. But that worked because we'd created a safe space where the students were collaborating with each other, and they felt safe with each other, and they felt safe with the tutors. And so they could take the risk of being the person stood at the front running the session. Some of them thought that I was abdicating my responsibility and that I, as the teacher, should be teaching the session. But actually, I think it was better for them to run the session. I'd done a lot of the planning and preparation. I gave them a lot of support and encouragement, but it gave them an opportunity to practice doing what they're learning to do, to teach. Will I be conducting another live session in the future? Who knows? I suspect I'll be asked if I would, and maybe I will. It's quite likely once we've done, I'm interested. I mean, at the moment, when I've got something new to say and when we've done some work with digital badges, yeah, it'd be really interesting to come back and share some of our learning about digital badges. So yeah, that would be good. Do go into halfbaked.education. I love getting comments on the posts in there. And particularly ones which kind of challenge my thinking. You'll find that there are some posts in there talking about rubrics and how we've tried to redesign rubrics. There are some posts in there about micro-credentials, digital badges, and how we're thinking about using those. So if you want more information on those sorts of things, there are posts in there about effective summative assessment and the criteria for effective summative assessment. I mean, it's the place I go when I want to have a little rant about something that is irritating me or that I think we could do better. Okay, I think we're running out of questions, so I'm going to say thank you all very much for joining me. I suspect it was some terribly horrible hour for some of you, so I really appreciate you making the time to come and listen to me waffling on. Thank you very much.
Hello, Global Forum for Teacher Educator members. Thank you for this opportunity. I'm Lila Duffy, and today I will be singing Hallelujah. Enjoy!
Remember to smile.
I heard there was a secret chord that David played and it pleased the Lord, but you don't really care for music, do ya? It goes like this: the fourth, the fifth, the minor fall, and the major lift. The baffled king composing hallelujah, 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 hallelujah.
Good job.
Your faith was strong, but you needed proof. You saw her bathing on the roof. Her beauty in the moonlight overthrew ya. She tied you to her kitchen chair. She broke your throne and she cut your hair. And on your lips she drew the hallelujah, 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 hallelujah. Maybe there's a God above, but all I've ever learned from love was how to shoot somebody who outdrew ya. And it's not a cry that you hear at night, and it's not somebody who's seen the light. It's a cold and it's a broken hallelujah. Hallelujah, 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 hallelujah. Thank you so much for letting me do